Grammar Point with me, Teacher Katie. In these videos, we dive into the details of English grammar to see how it works. Let's get started. Alright, so today we're going to be comparing two things, and I've got an example sentence for you. Today is as cold as yesterday. If we break apart this sentence, we can see our subject is today, our verb is, and note that that's a to-be verb. So our different forms of our be verb are am, is, are in the present, was, were in the past, and will be in the future. And then, of course, we have our object yesterday. But what about this middle section here? As cold as? Well, if we break that apart further, we could see we have the word as, then we have something in the middle, and then we have as again after it. So what's that word cold? What part of speech is that? Well, it's an adjective. Now, let's remember what adjectives do. Adjectives describe nouns, and they give more information about those nouns. Here are some nouns, a tree, a bag, and a ring. Now, if we added adjectives, it would give us a little bit more information about these things. So, I have a tree, but I could say a tall tree. A bag, I could say a heavy bag. Or a ring, I might say an expensive ring. So you can see each of these adjectives give us more information. Here are a couple of common adjectives, cold and hot. Can you think of any more adjectives that you know? Here's a list of some that I've written. However, there are many adjectives out there, and these are not all of them. But you might recognize these words and maybe be able to think of several more on your own. So, looking at our example sentence again, we have today is as cold as yesterday. So again, we have our subject, our be verb, our as adjective as combination, and then we have our object. This can be known as a positive statement. In this sentence, it's like we're saying two things are equal. Today is as cold as yesterday. It means that they are the same temperature. So it's like I'm saying 1 equals 1. Now, take a look at this sentence. Texas is not as cold as Minnesota. Here I've got my subject, my be verb, but I've added the word not into my as adjective as phrase. And then of course I end with my object, Minnesota. Here I'm making a negative statement, and I'm saying that two things are not equal. Texas is not as cold as Minnesota. So it's kind of like in math if I use the does not equal sign. 1 does not equal 2. I'm saying that these things are not the same. Now, if I take a look at these two types of comparisons, I've got my positive comparison using as adjective as, such as in my example, today is as cold as yesterday. I also have my negative comparison using not as adjective as, such as in my example, Texas is not as cold as Minnesota. Let's take a look at these three people and compare them using this grammar. So I've got Caleb and Jenny, who are both 25 years old, and then I've got Nick, who's 16 years old. If I compare Caleb and Jenny, they are the same age, and that's kind of like our positive sentence. Now if I compare Jenny and Nick, they are different ages, so that's like our negative statement. So, back to Caleb and Jenny. I could make the sentence, Caleb is as old as Jenny. Because they're both 25 years old, and 25 equals 25. Now, if I switched Jenny and Caleb's name in the sentence, and I said, Jenny is as old as Caleb, now, both of these statements are true, because no matter which person that you put first, the sentence or the mathematical equation is still true. Now, let's take a look at Jenny and Nick. If I compare Jenny and Nick, I could say Nick is not as old as Jenny, because 16 does not equal 25. Now, if I switch my subject and my object, and I make the sentence, Jenny is not as old as Nick, you could see, yeah, 25 doesn't equal 16. But, whereas our first sentence is true, our second sentence is false. It's not correct. Because in the first sentence we're saying Nick is younger than Jenny. Not as old as is the same as saying younger than. But in my second sentence, I will be saying Jenny is younger than Nick. And that is incorrect because she's not younger than him. She's actually older by 9 years. So, we have to be careful. When we compare two things with the positive as, it doesn't matter which noun is in the subject and which is the object. But when we compare with the negative, not as, we must always put the lesser noun as the subject and the greater noun as the object. So, here's our chart again. And you can see on the side where it has negative comparisons, I'm saying Texas is not as cold as Minnesota because Texas is less cold. And this does not equal sign actually kind of works more like a less than sign in mathematics. So, it's time to do some practice. During our practice time, there are 4 steps. First, you need to pause the video. Then you need to write your answers in a notebook. After you've written all of your answers, go ahead and play the video again, and you'll check your answers along with me on the video. So, here I've got 3 circles. I'd like you to write 4 sentences comparing the circles using as adjective as or not as adjective as. So, go ahead and pause the video and write your answers now. Welcome back. It's time to check your answers. Circle B is as large as circle C. That's true. They're both the same size. Circle C is as large as circle B. Also true. Remember, with a positive statement, we can switch our object and our subject. Circle B is not as large as circle A. Or I could say, circle C is not as large as circle A. So if we look again, all of these sentences are true. With these first 2 sentences and the second 2 sentences, we do have a difference though. So in the first 2 sentences, they're using a positive comparison because they're the same, and it doesn't matter which circle we put first. But in our second 2 sentences, we're using a negative comparison, so we need to be careful. Let's take a closer look at sentence 3. Circle B is not as large as circle A. If I said circle A is not as large as circle B, would that be correct? Well, in the first sentence, not as large as is kind of like we're saying smaller than, and that's true. But in the second sentence, if I changed not as large as to smaller than, circle A is smaller than circle B, we can see that that's not true. It's false. Same thing happens with sentence 4. I can say circle C is not as large as circle A, but if I said circle A is not as large as circle C, I've got a problem there. Because remember, not as large as is kind of the same as saying smaller than. What I'm saying is circle C is less large than circle A, and that's true. But if I said circle A is smaller than or less large than circle C, that's not true, that's false. So be careful. Remember, when we use that negative comparison, not as, adjective as, we must put the noun that is less first. This can be tricky, so just pay careful attention as we go forward, and don't worry, you'll get it after some practice. So, here I have a picture of two children. If I compare using the adjective tall, I could say the boy is not as tall as the girl, because the boy is less tall, so he must go first in the sentence. If I said short, then I can say the girl is not as short as the boy, because the girl is less short, so she must go first in the sentence.